Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Ashtathara Shrimati Divine Grace Abhay Chanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagavan Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai Jai Nithai Gaur Premanande Haribo. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashta Prayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, second canto, chapter number 5. The cause of all causes, text number 30. Vaikarikan manojajne Deva Vaikarika Dasa Digvatarka Pachetosvi Vanindro Pendra Mitrakaha Vaikarikan Manojagne Deva Vaikarika Dasa Digvatarka Pachetosvi Vanindro Pendra Mitraka Vaikarikan Manojajne Deva Vaikarika Dasa Digvatarka Pachetosvi Vanindro Pendra Mitrakaha. Indra Mitra Kaha Vaikarikan Manojajne Deva Vaikarika Dasaha Digvataka Pachetosmi Manindra Pendra Mitraka Vaikarikan Manojajne Deva Vaikarika Dasa Digvartaka Pachetosvi Vanindra Pendra Mitrakaha. Word for word, Vaikarika, from the mode of goodness. Manaha, the mind. Jajne, generated. Devaha, demigods. Vaikarikaha, in the mode of goodness. Dasa, 10. Dik, the controller of directions. Vata, the controller of air. Arka, the sun. Prachetaha, Varuna. Ashvi, the Ashvini Kumaras. Vani, the fire god. Indra, the king of heaven. Upendra, the deity in heaven. Mitra, one of the 12 Adityas. Kaha, Prajapati the Brahma. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhay Channaravinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. From the mode of goodness, the mind is generated and becomes manifest, as also the 10 demigods controlling the bodily movements. Such demigods are known as the controllers of directions, the controller of air, the sun god, the father of Daksha Prajapati, the Ashwini Kumaras, the fire god, the king of heaven, the worshipable deity in heaven, the chief of the Adityas, and Brahmaji the Prajapati, all come into existence. Purport. Vaikarika is the neutral stage of creation, and Tejas is the initiative of creation, while Tamas is the full display of material creation under the spell of the darkness of ignorance. Manufacture of the necessities of life. Manufacture of manufacture of the necessities of life, quote unquote, in factories and workshops excessively prominent in the age of Kali or in the age of the machine, is the summit stage of the quality of darkness. Such manufacturing enterprises by human society are in the mode of darkness because factually there is no necessity for the commodities manufactured. Human society primarily requires food for subsistence, shelter for sleeping, defense for protection, and commodities for satisfaction of the senses. The senses are the practical signs of life, as will be explained in the next verse. Human civilization is meant for purifying the senses, and objects of sense satisfaction should be supplied as much as absolutely required, but not for aggravating artificial sensory needs. Food, shelter, defense, and sense gratification are all needs in material existence. Otherwise, in his pure, uncontaminated state of original life, the living entity has no such needs. The needs are therefore artificial, and in the pure state of life, there are no such needs. As such, increasing the artificial needs, as is the standard of material civilization or advancing an economic development of human society, is a sort of engagement in darkness without knowledge. By such engagement, human energy is spoiled, because human energy is primarily meant for purifying the senses in order to engage them in satisfying the senses of the Supreme Lord. The Supreme Lord, being the supreme possessor of spiritual senses, is the master of the senses, Rishikesha. Rishika means the senses, and Isha means the master. The Lord is not the servant of the senses, or in other words, He is not directed by the dictation of the senses, but the conditioned souls or the individual living entities are servants of the senses. They are conducted by the direction or dictation of the senses, and therefore material civilization is a kind of engagement in sense gratification only. The standard of human civilization should be to cure the disease of sense gratification, and one can do this simply by becoming an agent for satisfying the spiritual senses of the Lord. The senses are never to be stopped in their engagements, but one should purify them by engaging them in the pure service of sense gratification of the master of the senses. This is the instruction of the whole Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna wanted first of all to satisfy his own senses by his decision not to fight with his kinsmen and friends. But Lord Shri Krishna taught him the Bhagavad Gita just to purify Arjuna's decision for sense gratification. Therefore Arjuna agreed to satisfy the senses of the Lord, and thus he fought the battle of Kurukshetra as the Lord desired. The Vedas instruct us to get out of the existence of darkness and go forward on the path of light. Tamasi ma jyotirgama. The path of light is therefore to satisfy the senses of the Lord. Misguided men or less intelligent men follow the path of self-realization without any attempt to satisfy the transcendental senses of the Lord by following the path shown by Arjuna and other devotees of the Lord. On the contrary, they are artificially try to stop the activities of the senses, yoga system, or they deny the transcendental senses of the Lord, jnana system. The devotees, however, are above the yogis and the jnanis because pure devotees do not deny the senses of the Lord. They want to satisfy the senses of the Lord. Only because of the darkness of ignorance do the yogis and jnanis deny the senses of the Lord, and thus artificially try to control the activities of the diseased senses. In the diseased condition of the senses, there is too much engagement of the senses in increasing material needs. When one comes to see the disadvantage of aggravating the sense activities, one is called a jnani. And when one tries to stop the activities of the senses by the practice of the yogic principles, he is called a yogi. But when one is fully aware of the transcendental senses of the Lord and tries to satisfy his senses, one is called a devotee of the Lord. The devotees of the Lord do not try to deny the senses of the Lord, nor do they artificially stop the actions of the senses, but they do voluntarily engage the purified senses in the service of the master of the senses, as was done by Arjuna, thereby easily attaining the perfection of satisfying the Lord, the ultimate goal of all perfection. Translation again: from the mode of goodness, the mind is generated and becomes manifest, as also the 10 demigods controlling the bodily movements. Such demigods are known as the controllers of directions, the controller of air, the sun god, the father Daksha Prajapati, the Ashwini Kumaras, the fire god, the king of heaven, the worshipful deity in heaven, the chief of the Adityas, and Brahmaji, the Prajapati, all come into existence. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Yat kripatamaham. Hare Krishna. So reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th canto, cause of all, 2nd canto, chapter 5, the cause of all causes, text number 30 today. Previous verses we saw how by the contact of the false ego, the first of the 5 elements, namely the sky, is generated, and gradually we saw all the other elements become created as well, rather generated. And we see also the sensory perceptions also being generated and the objects as well of those sense perceptions. Now we're seeing what happens when the mode of goodness comes in contact with false ego. And that is the controllers of these activities. They become manifest. So in this particular verse, Prabhupada has gone into extensive detail. In fact, Prabhupada's purport is a class in itself, because Prabhupada has gone straight from talking about the mode of ignorance, going all the way to the transcendental state of consciousness, Sattvam Visuddham Vasudevam Sabditam, going to the topmost pure platform of devotional service, or the topmost platform of existence, which is Vasudev's Sattva or Shuddha Sattva, completely beyond the modes of material nature. So here Prabhupada is saying that there are 3, he's described the modes of nature in 3 different ways. He's talked about how Vaikarika, the neutral stage of creation, which represents the mode of goodness, Tejas, the initiative of creation, which is passion, and Tamas is the full display of material creation under the spell of darkness of ignorance, which is generally attached to destruction. So Prabhupada has described it in a different way for us to be able to understand the three phases of creation. But Prabhupada then talks about how all of this is just simply for us to be able to stay here in this material world. In fact, it's just simply for us to remain in the mode of darkness. And what is the mode of darkness? It is simply trying to increase our unnecessary necessities. So Prabhupada here says that the necessities of life are just simply meant for us to satisfy the conditions to be able to eat, sleep. Let's see what Prabhupada says here. For eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. Prabhupada uses the word mating in a different context and says sense gratification here. So eating, sleeping, sense gratification, and defense. These are the 4 things that human society requires to be able to exist in this material world. But Prabhupada says what's happening now is that we are taking more and more interest in trying to satisfy our senses so that we can comfortably live in this material world. But the whole point of existence in this material world is that we've come here to enjoy, but it's not working out. Instead, rather than trying to use our senses to enjoy, we should use our senses to satisfy Krishna. So Prabhupada gradually explains that in the purport. I thought today we'll just go through the purport step by step, because if we can understand this simple progressive knowledge Prabhupada gives in this particular purport, we can understand how Prabhupada's talking about the creation of material existence and how it's applicable to devotees. You can immediately see the correlation there. Because Prabhupada goes from talking about how from ignorance and the interaction of the modes of nature we get material created, the rest of the creation is generated, how we can use that and extricate ourselves from material existence altogether. Or in other words, transcend and go beyond. So the first step of the purport, Prabhupada talks, as I mentioned, that the mode of darkness is unnecessary necessities. That although the senses, we have them, we don't deny them. We engage those senses simply to be able to keep the body and soul together. And keeping the body and soul together, unfortunately nowadays, has different definitions according to who you are and where you're from and your own background. For some people, they may think that, keeping the body and senses together by a certain amount of food. Some people will say otherwise. But Prabhupada's saying here that we should just simply take what is absolutely required, but not for aggravating artificial sensory needs. So for the devotees, the senses, they are considered to be like snakes without poisonous fangs. I think Bodhananda Saraswati Thakur, he mentions this, that they are like durtendindriya kala sarvapatili prokayat dhamstrayate. That they are like senses, or the senses are like snakes without fangs. They're easily controlled. For the devotees, they don't care too much about controlling the snake, called the senses, because the senses no longer have the poisonous effect. For the devotee, rather, he just simply engages in devotional service by the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But the karmis, the jnanis, and the yogis, they endeavor to control the senses to a certain degree, although that they are diseased. So I'll come to that one point in a second. The whole point of this first section of the purport, Prabhupada is saying is that by engaging in activities that are beyond the basic needs, atyahara prayasascha, so on and so forth, by over-endeavoring, by engaging in such activities, we're spoiling our human form of life. We're spoiling the energy which is given to us to be able to overcome the insurmountable energy of Maya. Because Krishna says that by His mercy, one can overcome the insurmountable energy of Maya. That, the verse escapes. Mahatmanastu mam partha devim prakatimashtha. No, not that one. Devi esha gunamayi mama maya duratya mam eva papadyante maya eva taranti te. That by surrendering unto Krishna, then one will be able to overcome this insurmountable energy of Maya. So Prabhupada says that the energy of human form of life is simply for purifying the senses. Atata Brahma Jignasa. That is the first step. But the final step is in purifying the senses. Because by nature the senses, they are very uncontrollable. Kadambakanda Maharaj, he once, when he was in Sydney, he often gives this example, but I remember when he gave it in Sydney, it was like a, kind of like what you call a revelation. That he gave the example of how the senses work in relation to the mind. So you can imagine the mind is sitting at a desk, a personification of mind sitting at a desk with a telephone in front of it. And every so often the phone rings and the mind picks up. And when the mind picks up, and he goes, hey, it's the sense of touch, it's your hands. There's something very soft, we should go ahead and we should go and enjoy it. And then the mind puts the phone down. And then again the mind gets another phone call. It's the tongue, sense of taste. Now we need to enjoy it. more nice food like rasgulla, rasmalai. We need to enjoy sweet items. And then the mind puts it down. Like this, so on and so forth, the senses completely bombard the mind. The senses, the knowledge acquiring senses completely bombard the mind with knowledge at all point in time. And the mind's function is to accept or reject. And it happens like that. And when it happens like that, the intelligence must also be of that frequency for us to be able to make a decision whether to go ahead with it or not. Because the mind will accept or reject, but whether or not we go ahead with it is up to our usage of our intelligence. So the senses, they need to be purified. But how do you purify the senses? There's two ways you can do it. Krishna says that above the senses is the mind, above the mind is the intelligence, and above the intelligence is the soul. The soul is naturally pure. But Krishna gives this example to say this is where all lust resides. And if lust resides within the intelligence, the next door neighbor of the soul, you're in trouble. So Krishna says by transcendental knowledge, you'll be able to overcome this lust. By engaging in devotional service with knowledge, you'll be able to overcome lust. That's the context in which Krishna gives this. So you can go that direction as well. The other direction which the yogis and the jnanis try to do is try to control the diseased senses themselves. Rather than trying to purify the senses and engaging them in their natural purified state by engaging them in the service of the Lord, what do the jnanis and the yogis do? They try to control or deny the diseased senses altogether. So Prabhupada mentions here that Rishikesha Atashi Krishna Namadi na bhaved grayam indriye sevan mukhi jivado swayameva spuratyada sarvapadi vinirmuktam tat paratvena nirmalam rishikena rishikesha sevanam bhakti ruchyate. That by engaging the senses in Krishna's service, beginning with the tongue, one will be able to understand the nature of Krishna. By slowly engaging the senses in Krishna's service, one is able to overcome the material designations one has unnecessarily accepted and come to the stage of rendering pure devotional service to Krishna. Prabhupada mentions Rishikesha Sevanam Bhakti Ruchyate, that bhakti means to engage the senses in serving Krishna's senses. So this is a crucial point because a person has senses. A person has likes and dislikes. So Krishna, being a person, has his preferences. Although he is magnanimous, although he is extremely kind, although he satisfies the senses of all living entities, still he has his own preferences. Still he likes things to be done in a certain way. And the nature of the devotee is that they are simply engaged in satisfying the senses of the Lord in the way he wants it. So they're like flexible, like liquid. They're able to bend and shape themselves in such a way that Krishna is always deriving the best enjoyment from their actions. Whereas the jnanis and the yogis, they are just simply engaged in their own sense gratification. In one sense, Prabhupada mentions the transcendentalists, these yogis and jnanis, they're also considered to be transcendentalists. But their extent of their transcendental nature is very limited. They know they don't exist and they shouldn't exist in this material world and they should get out. They know some extent of their identity of the soul. But they are again contaminated by the modes of ignorance and passion. Because aruya krishyena param padam tata patanti anadito yusmadangraya, that once these persons think that the ultimate goal of life is a certain liberation, a certain understanding of Krishna which is not appropriate, not understandable by, or not accepted by the Shastras, by Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, then what happens is that they attain their so-called destination of liberation only for a short amount of time. And then again they fall down because they have not taken to the service of the Lord's lotus feet. Again, Krishna's feet, service to Krishna's feet, pleasing Krishna according to his desires, his preference. So this is the nature of our purifying the senses, engaging our senses in such a way that Krishna's senses are satisfied. And Prabhupada gives the example, a very important understanding of Srimad Bhagavad Gita, that Arjuna didn't want to fight because he wanted to satisfy his own senses. He didn't want to fight because he thought that his kinsmen, his family and friends, they're more important than Krishna's sense gratification. His sense gratification was more important than what Krishna wanted. But Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita and flipped that around, and Arjuna then accepted whatever Krishna wanted to do. So, the nature of material existence is that we have unnecessary necessities, especially in this age of Kali, age of the machine. Prabhupada really nicely mentioned this. I like this sentence. Manufacture of the, this is quote unquote, necessities of life in factories and workshops, excessively prominent in the age of Kali or the age of the machine. It's the summit stage of the quality of darkness. When you think of advancement, you think of knowledge, you think of wisdom, you think of coming to a stage of being superior, to being much more better than what you were before. But Prabhupada is saying it's the summit stage of ignorance, darkness. You've pretty much gone in the opposite direction. So this is the nature of material existence. And Kali Yuga pretty much personifies, or rather is the crux of our desires to enjoy. Because there's no such thing as trying to engage the senses in Krishna's service. Everything is simply for the senses. And it's going to get worse from here on in. So the engagement of the senses should be for satisfying Krishna's desires, Krishna's sense gratification. Now, this whole section also emphasizes the speciality or the rarity of the human form of life. Because we need to understand that we are born into this material existence simply to satisfy our senses. And coming in contact with the modes of material nature, we take up different types of bodies from the 8.4 million species of life. And you need to understand, to get to the human form of life, when one is in the human form of life and performs pious or impious activities, as Krishna says, punya, if they have punya or pious activities, they go to the heavenly planets, enjoy, and again they'll fall down. And when they fall down, again they have to go through the transmigration to different bodies of the 8.4 million species of life, all the way back to the human species of life again. And Prabhupada says it's millions and millions of lives. 8.4 million is just, I guess, just the beginning. There are different types within those species of life. You different colors, different ways they act, different features. You can have a small dog or a big dog. You can have a black dog or a white dog, depending on one's desires. And one has to go through all these different species and finally come back to the human form of life. And once they come back to the human form of life, if again they act like animals again, then it is very foolish. It is a very nonsensical proposition to be able to again fall into that category of life, of birth and death. So, the human form of life, atata brahma jignasa. Now that you've come to the human form of life, you should inquire into the absolute truth. Janmadi yasya yataha, that what is the source of all existence? Krishna is the source of all existence. And what is the relationship between the living entity and Krishna? It is that of service. And that service is simply engaging the senses in Krishna's senses. Engaging the senses in satisfying what Krishna wants. And what does Krishna want? Krishna has already mentioned in Bhagavad Gita. Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru. Satatam kirtayanto mam yatantas jidavataha. So on and so forth. Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja. Krishna has very clearly indicated what he wants in Bhagavad Gita. But rascals, they'll go ahead and mention that actually, I am Krishna, Krishna within is actually speaking such and all that nonsense is mentioned there. Why? Because they're hesitant to engage their senses in Krishna's service. They don't want to engage the senses in Krishna's service because they don't see the need for doing so. They think that I know how to enjoy the senses, I know what needs to be done, I know how to liberate myself, I don't need Krishna. So it comes down to that. Prabhupada then talks about the whole point of the Vedas is to teach us how to get out of material existence. Material existence is full of darkness, as we already mentioned before. Prabhupada's mentioning, it is just simply unnecessary economic development which leads one to just simply wasting his energy. Rather, one should go towards the path of light. And Prabhupada says the path of light is therefore to satisfy the senses of the Lord. But misguided men or less intelligent men follow the path of self-realization without any attempt to satisfy the transcendental senses of the Lord. So Prabhupada then classifies how to satisfy the senses, what does it actually mean? And for us devotees, it is very, very important to analyze these different yoga processes, because the different yoga processes are there as step by step to get to bhakti, because it is gradual purification of the senses. Each of these stages of yoga, not speaking of bhakti, completely transcendental, each of these stages of yoga, they describe, they give us an indication to a certain extent how the false ego acts, how the false ego is still present. For example, I'll explain here. Prabhupada says here, they artificially try to stop the activities of the senses. That's called the yoga system. So the ego is working in such a way that one thinks that he's able to control his own senses, that he can stop it and cease it. Or they deny the transcendental senses of the Lord, the jnana system. One thinks that he's powerful enough, one thinks that he is the doer, he is the all-knower, he knows everything, that actually I know that Krishna has no senses, and I also therefore have no senses because I am also Krishna. It's just an easy way to get out of the whole process of purification, nothing more. It's just a lazy way of self-realization. It's not even self-realization, it's just simply a step before. Because what happens is that when you follow these activities, when one comes to see the disadvantage of aggravating the sense activities, in other words, going through karma kanda activities, performing karma kanda if you're lucky, otherwise going into full ignorance and trying to enjoy the senses, one comes to the stage that actually I'm not being satisfied. So what happens? Tyaga. From complete bhoga to tyaga. In that state of tyaga, one sees the disadvantage of aggravating sense activities, and what do? They cease. They try to stop their sense activities through some mental speculation. And they try to cover up in that way. They're called a jnani, in other words. So they use their mental speculation to justify how to stop their sense gratification. And in the process of doing that, because of material nature's avarnatmika and pakshamatmika shaktis or functions, they'll end up deluding themselves and falling back into material existence and gratifying their senses anyway. Like, say for example, the Mayavadis, they are jnanis, but they are, poisonous. You could put it that way. Their understanding is so detrimental, just keep this in mind, that they are able to transcend beyond material existence and able to enter into Brahma Jyoti. But because of the lack of service to Krishna, they fall back down and they engage in philanthropic work. And they think that is spiritual. So you understand? The mentality is that they've given up sense gratification, saying that sense gratification is not going to work. They get to a certain mental stage where they've given up sense gratification altogether, somewhere close to spiritualization, and they fall back down and engage in sense gratificatory work anyway, thinking that to be the spiritual path, thinking that to be transcendence. Because if you go and tell every person, spiritualist who's performing such nationalistic or altruistic service, they will say it's spiritual. That they will say that service to man is service to God. That is the jnani tendency. It just simply came from the tyaga due to extensive bhoga, enjoyment. And again from tyaga they've gone back to bhoga and they've classified that as spiritual. So it's a very crooked mentality. And the crooked mentality goes further. One tries to stop the activity of the senses by the practice of yogic principles. But the problem is that by trying to stop the senses forcefully like that, denying the senses altogether, then what generally happens? Daksha Prajapati tells Narad Muni in Srimad Bhagavatam that actually, you know how to stop sense gratification or the desire to stop sense gratification? Is that you do more sense gratification to the extent you burn yourself out. This is Daksha Prajapati's plan. That's why he's known as Daksha, very expert in sense gratification. He's saying that you engage the senses so much that you naturally develop a distaste for it, and then naturally you'll become detached from it. So it's like pouring a fuel into fire. Pouring so much fuel into the fire that it'll cease to exist. But that doesn't work. It's a very, very misleading path. Why? Because if you engage the senses wholly and fully, this is the main thing. If you engage the senses in sense gratification, you develop reactions, sinful reactions. But along with that, you develop the hankering for that activity again. So no matter how much you experience sense gratification and become distasteful or detached from it, the hankering that you've developed and the reactions that come from it will force you to accept it again. So in other words, it's like putting fuel on fire and the fire becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. Very dangerous process. And the nature of material existence, especially the mind, is that it will oscillate between bhoga and tyaga. So that so-called state of renunciation of tyaga will eventually disappear, and one will again become attached to bhoga or sense enjoyment again. Because the senses always have to be engaged. There's not even a single moment that one can remain unengaged. The senses always have to be engaged. So what does Prabhupada say then? When one is fully aware of the transcendental senses of the Lord and tries to satisfy his senses, one is called a devotee of the Lord. The devotees of the Lord do not try to deny the senses of the Lord, nor do they artificially stop the senses. So therefore they're not jnanis and they're not yogis. They don't try to deny the senses of the Lord out of laziness, and they don't try to artificially stop the actions of the senses out of laziness again. It's both lazy paths, if you think about it. It's kind of like, when you get burnt, there's a saying, once burnt, twice shy. When you get burnt, or when you go into a difficult situation in life, or something very, very traumatic, you don't want to do it again. You don't want to go down that path again. You don't want to experience that again. You don't want to overcome it. It's very difficult to have to face that difficulty. That's what jnana and yoga is all about. It's just simply trying to not address the cause of distress, not trying to overcome that, but trying to bypass it, to somehow or other sweep it under the rug, to be able to somehow on their own strength be able to escape material existence. But that doesn't work. So what is the core problem here? The problem here is that we need to recognize that Krishna is a person and he has senses. We also have senses, but our senses are diseased. So no matter how much we use our senses, we'll always remain in the diseased state unless we dovetail them in Krishna's service. And we begin slowly and steadily by first chanting and engaging in the activities as prescribed by the spiritual master, the four regulative principles. And gradually one gets to stage from sadhana bhakti to raganuga bhakti, wherein everything one thinks about, or every single point in time one thinks, it's just simply for the pleasure of the Lord. Always for the Lord, nothing more than what the Lord wants. Nothing else other than what the Lord wants. So, the perfection of satisfying the Lord, the ultimate goal of life, is only available for the devotees. So now, one more thing I wanted to mention here is that, I'll just quickly wrap up. First we talked about, Prabhupada talks about the unnecessary necessities, how this is simply the darkness of ignorance. This is how, we chant Om Jnana Timirandasya, we're born into the darkness of illusion or delusion. This is what it's all about. It's all about simply trying to satisfy the senses for one's own enjoyment. And you end up going into this cycle of birth and death again and again and again. Bhutva bhutva praliyate. Then because that is considered to be a waste of human form of life, what is the real use of the human form of life? Is that we need to engage the senses in Krishna's service. And we first begin them by purifying them, by dovetailing them in Krishna's service. Gradually coming to the point where we're completely pure. The senses, naturally, the only thought process is, how do I engage this in Krishna's service? That is the only thought process. Prabhupada says the pure devotee is so free, so liberated, that when he's in the material world, everything he sees, he just simply thinks, how can I engage this in Krishna's service? How can I engage this in Krishna's service? That they are not entangled, they're not bound by that object, they're not affected by that object. Whereas in the conditioned state, as soon as you see an object, it feels like it's a pressure. You feel like some sort of, it's all in the mind, but you think this object is for my enjoyment, and immediately you're bound. You cannot think otherwise. So the pure devotee is the stage where one simply engages the senses in Krishna's service. Now, the other process of self-realization, jnana and yoga, they're helpful for understanding the self and that one's separate from material existence. One is the Atma, but they are not complete because they still deny the senses of the Lord, or they deny sense actions altogether. In other words, they don't recognize the person, the personality, the whole idea of individuality is still not completely manifest in those particular processes. So Bhakti Yoga is the topmost because it has everything. You don't need to give up anything. Sthane stita shutikatam tanuman mano bir. That simply one has to engage in hearing. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Simply engage the senses in Krishna's service. Atashi Krishna namadi na bhaved grayam indriye sevan mukhi jivado swayam eva spurateda. It begins by chanting the tongue. Yeah, it's very interesting how unnecessary necessities is often linked with how much we eat. Right? How much we eat, just enough to keep the body and soul together, right? So it begins with the tongue. Eating, prasadam, and chanting. The diet and, what was it? The diet and the medicine. What is the medicine? Chanting Hare Krishna. And what is the diet? Krishna prasadam. So these two things will purify, bring us from the diseased state to the pure state of consciousness. And the devotees, therefore, we should not deny the senses of Krishna, and we should not think about stopping sensory activity altogether. We should always be engaged in Krishna's service. Or we should try and somehow or other engage what we have in Krishna's service. So that's that point. The last point I wanted, that's a summary of the purport today. But the main point, one of the points I wanted to mention today is that Prabhupada mentions this last sentence, but they do voluntarily engage the purified senses in the service of the master of the senses. This is a very interesting point of voluntary. You will not be forced to purify your senses. In other words, Krishna will not force you to engage in devotional service. It is a voluntary thing. Voluntary thing means you need to be inspired and you need to be motivated to continually push on. And that can only happen in the association of devotees. It's not possible outside. Where will you get the inspiration? If you think about it, before we all came into Krishna consciousness, the inspiration was in the opposite direction, towards darkness. But somehow or other, just a moment's association with a devotee, we doubted this process that we were following of going into darkness, and we somehow or other came into devotional service. And we're still here simply by the mercy of the devotees, not by our own strength. We must always remember that. And I'll give this example. Voluntarily engage the purified senses. In the pastime of when Vishnu Duras met the Yamaduras when they were taking Ajamil, in that particular section, what happened was Ajamil, he heard the conversation between the Yamaduras and the Vishnu Duras, and the Yamaduras left Ajamil and went, and the Vishnu Duras untied him and then let him go back into his body. And at that particular point in time, he saw the Vishnu Duras, and he couldn't help but be astonished and marvel their beauty and how they looked. And later on, you'll see also how Yamaraj explains that to his Yamaduras, that my dear sons, my dear servants, the people that you saw, they were servants of the Lord, and they looked non-different from Him. Actually, whatever they do is on the same level as Krishna. But Prabhupada writes in the purport, it was a very strong sentence. Prabhupada saying that although they're nearly on the same platform of the Lord, they voluntarily choose to be subordinate to the Lord. Their devotees are more superior to the Lord because the Lord wants to glorify them, the Lord wants to put them in that position and wants to serve them. But what is the mood of the devotee? Even in that position, they want to serve the Lord. They voluntarily give up that idea of I will be supreme, I will do this. In other words, I am the controller, I am the enjoyer simply means my sense gratification, my enjoyment. They give that up, and what do they think of? Krishna Sukha Hetu. What will give Krishna pleasure? That I will do. So this is voluntary. Voluntary means it won't finish. It will continue on. You have to make the conscious choice again and again and again and again and again and again and again. Moment to moment decision. And being in this stage of existence, the conditioned state of life, we will make the wrong choices, but our duty is to always come back. Just as we chant, the mind wanders, we have to bring it back. Similarly, we have to always come back, always come back to the path of devotional service if we stray away. And that, in the association of devotees, is very easy. You will immediately go down the straight path back home, back to Godhead. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions, any comments, feedback? Yes, Prabhu. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. Why the mind comes from goodness, why the intelligence comes from passion. I honestly can't remember, but I do remember that the mind, the deity of the mind is Aniruddha. Oh yes, Prabhu.
The nature of goodness is maintenance.
Uh-huh.
The mind maintains the nature of existence. That's why the mind is said to come from the mind of goodness.
And
like Vishnu maintains.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he's Untitled goodness.
Yep.
Mind maintains a mature existence. That's why it's said to come from the mind of goodness.
So mind is considered to come from the mode of goodness because it maintains. Then intelligence in ignorance?
Intelligent from passion.
Oh, intelligent from passion. And that's what generates the next bodies in continuing existence.
I guess intelligence always planning how to engage in sense gratification.
Okay. That makes sense?
I just don't understand how intelligence plans to engage in sense gratification. I thought intelligence discriminates with the mind, accepts and rejects.
Okay, say that again.
The function of the intelligence is to discriminate between the activities of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
So how does the intelligence plan for sense gratification?
How does the intelligence plan for sense gratification? Actually, the mind accepts and rejects, but it's through the intelligence what exactly you accept and reject. So through the intelligence you decide what to go, where to go, and the mind accepts or rejects that. The mind itself just simply accepts or rejects, but the intelligence directs where, what, those sort of things. So you can understand in that aspect, that it's with the intelligence that the mind needs to operate. So it's with the mind accepting or rejecting on a particular platform, but you're going from one point to another point, you require the intelligence there. Because then that's what you talk about when Dayato Vishayan Pumsam. That the intelligence, it wavers, and then you choose the wrong path, and then the mind it goes down that path, along with intelligence.
How does that relate to passion?
It's the intelligence that, through intelligence we make the acts, and through those acts we get the reactions, and that generates further bodies. So in that sort of creation. Do you know which section of Bhagavatam this is mentioned? Third canto? Third canto. I think Radha Vinod Prabhu mentioned something about third canto, 26th chapter. It's
And when you say that the mind maintains our existence, what does that mean? It's because of the mind we transmigrate one body to another. Because of desire, like in the 15th chapter of Gita, Krishna says the material world is a reflection of the spiritual world. And just like the reflection of the tree is based on the water, that water is compared to our desire. Because of our mature desires, we have transmigrated from one body to another. And all these desires are stored in the mind. So that's the driving of the engine which is causing the transmigration.
Thank you, Prabhu. Anything else? Thank you very much. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagavan ki jai. Nithai Gaur Premanande.